Yes. So, buenas tardes, Donna. Wonderful. All right, so it seems as though we are ready to start, and hopefully the others will join us soon. All right, so today's session is Transforming Learning Through Technology. My name is Leanne Pear, and I hope that at the end of this session, you would be able to take what we have done today and go back into your classroom and be able to apply it. And of course, feel free to ask any questions or leave comments during the session. And as well after, you can feel free to contact me if you had questions even after the session. So we are about to start. So our objectives for today, we want you to be able to reflect on your current use of technology in the classroom using two frameworks, the Samar Framework and the Tpac framework. Some of you may have heard about it before, or if it's not familiar to any of you, that's quite okay as well. We also want you to look at purpose and outcome. When using technology, it's very important that whatever purpose you set out, you actually achieve it. So we want you to be able to look at purpose and outcome. And finally, I would like you to be able to integrate technology tools intentionally to transform the learning process. And that word intentionally is really significant. Improving your teaching and incorporating technology could be challenging, could be exciting, nerve-wracking, and sometimes even a little annoying. Yes? But the beauty of the process is that no matter how big or small your leaps are in this area, your students are going to benefit. So once you start using technology intentionally, even if you start off at a very small rate, your students are going to benefit once you are using it. So I just want to talk about this a little bit. I know the name of the session is Transforming Learning Through Technology, and it might sound really weird when I say that really and truly it does not start with the technology. It really is about changing mindset and understanding that technology is a way to really be able to transform how your students learn. With new technology allows us to explore areas in our classrooms that before certain technologies we would not have been able to do this. And I also want to mention, I am a technology nerd. I mean, really, I love technology. But there is a time and place to use technology in the classroom. Sometimes it is not the best thing to use any technology at all. So I really want to put a plug here to let everyone know, although we're talking about technology, it does not mean that every class has to have it. And it does not mean that you need to be tied to it. Sometimes collaboration may need to be done face to face, depending on the age of your students. Sometimes you need them to build fine motor skills if you're working with younger children. So paper and pencil will be fine. So we need to be able to be smart about how we are using technology and make sure we're not just using it because it sounds cool to be able to say, well, I use technology in my classroom. So that's a plug I really want to make as we proceed in the session, that we bear in mind that technology is really about using it to create things, create lessons that we would not have before the technology existed, been able to do. So before we actually get into how we ensure effective integration of technology in your lesson, I actually want to find out a little bit about how you use technology in your class. So we're going to go to a poll, and I would like you to choose the answer which best represents what you do most of the time with technology. So when you use technology, is it normally done to teach the whole class? Or do you send home the students to do something with the technology? Do you use it more, you would say, to plan your lesson or to plan your activities? Maybe assessment, maybe you have something other than what I have here, or maybe you don't use technology at all. All right, so you're seeing persons use it for planning. Whole class activity, okay. Oh, nice that there are persons who are giving students the technology to use at home. Okay, so whole class activity and homework seems to be in the majority. And of course, if you use it in another way, you can feel free to add that to the chat and it will be great to see. Okay, wonderful. All right, so I'm going to end this poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so whole class activity and homework seems to be the most popular use of the technology. I would like you to take another poll. If you had to say which apps or sites you use most in your teaching, which one of these would you say is the most popular? PowerPoint or presentations, Google Slides, websites, YouTube videos, if you use games, maybe Microsoft Suite, Microsoft Word, Google Docs, other, or you don't use technology at all. Okay, so YouTube videos definitely is a winner here, and PowerPoint or Google Slides, so presentations, to be able to use it for presentations. All right, so I'm going to end this poll in 5, 4. Okay, so it's changing actually, so I'm going to leave it up a little while. All right, so PowerPoint has now taken the lead in terms of the most popular app, and PowerPoint is certainly gaining. All right, so we can then, based on the first question, where teachers would have used it either as a homework or an extension, as well as for presentations, that PowerPoint or Google Slides, as well as YouTube videos, is what would be used in the classroom. Okay, thank you. I'm going to end the poll now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And the last question, just to get another idea of how you use technology, which of the following would you say is the most common use of technology for you in the classroom? Do you use it in terms of instruction? Do you use it for practice or reinforcement? Or do you use it for students when they are not being supervised by you? So basically you send them home with it as either extension exercises, or you want them to use it on their own, possibly as just additional links that you would use in the classroom. Okay. So instructional use for learning, followed by individual or group use for practice or reinforcement. Seems to be the most popular way that teachers would use the tools. Okay, definitely instructional use for learning seems to be the most popular. Okay. All right, excellent. So this gives me a very good idea of how technology is currently being used. And it also would have provided you with a bit of reflection in terms of how you actually currently use your technology. So I'm going to end the poll now. And we get back to our presentation. All right. So just to get back a little bit to the chat, I'm seeing teachers from secondary school and a range of subject areas. So wonderful. And Aileen is saying that infrastructure at her school isn't that conducive to individual or group work, unfortunately. Afia and Solange are mentioning YouTube. Beverly is saying that she uses it for assessment. Okay, great. So I want you to remember what you would have mentioned at the beginning, and then at the end, you would see if there's any shift in how you can now use the technology a little differently to how you're currently using it. All right, so let's get into it. So how exactly do you ensure effective integration of technology in your lesson? Is there a way that you know for sure that you are integrating technology effectively, or do you just hope for the best when you go into the classroom? How do you know that your use of technology is actually impacting learning in the classroom? Do you have any form of measurement, or do you just say, I think this is going to be fun, and so I'm going to use it? So what we want to do, and as I said, feel free to continue chatting because I am reading your comments. So Beverly says, I think we might be hoping for the best, but ideally, I'd like to think that the children enjoy doing it. All right. And I hope that by the end of the session, Beverly, that you are actually able to say, I know that the lesson had an impact because I used technology, because that's what we want. So Nyan says a little of both sometimes, but I guess we use most exams as a measuring tool. Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for participating in the session. All right, so I actually want to provide you with a framework that you can actually use to help measure how you are using the technology. So we are going to look at the TPAC and the SAMR model. And some of you may be familiar with it, but let's take a look. I want to remind us again that the reason for using technology intentionally is because it is very useful as a servant, but it is not so useful when it is not used intentionally. And this quote basically captures it. And we would have had many discussions about the dangers of technology. So of course, we want to be able to use it intentionally. So let's talk a little bit about TPAC. And before we actually get into it, we just want to mention, so this is a framework that was created by Matthew Kohler and Punya Mishra, the guys on the picture. And basically what they looked at, they added to what teachers are already doing. So teachers already were teaching content. That is what our expertise in. Whether we teach biology, we teach French, mathematics, Spanish, that is what our content knowledge is. That is what we want the students to know at the end of the session. And then the pedagogy, which we, after doing DPED or having been exposed to teaching for so long, that is how we do it. So what Matthew Kohler and Punya Mishra added was how technology fits into that. And of course, we're going to get into it. So I want to give you a little overview, just in case you're not actually familiar with the TPAC. We're going to look at a little video to give us some idea of what it is.
Here's a brief overview of the TPAC model presented by 21st century educators. This framework combines 3 knowledge areas: content, pedagogical, and technological. When combined, they work together to increase student motivation and greater accessibility to knowledge. Content: what teachers know or the what. History, math, Spanish, or accounts. It's the teacher's expertise. Pedagogy: how teachers deliver the content. Direct instruction, group discussion, game-based learning, or project-based learning, etc. How are we presenting the content to our students so that it is accessible? Technology: the tools that we select to enhance and support student learning. When all 3 knowledge areas overlap, that's where the magic happens. Student learning blossoms as opposed to when they remain in silos. Remember, all these knowledge areas may look different from someone else based on the context in your classroom.
All right. So I hope you all enjoyed our 21st century video, and I hope it was actually useful in breaking down what TPAC was. All right. So Before we get into a little more detail of what TPAC is, has anybody ever gone into the classroom all excited to use a tool and then came out and found that it actually caused more time wasting or it caused more difficulty than if you had not used technology? And I can speak for myself. I know there were times when I would go into the classroom, you think I have the lesson, the students are definitely going to enjoy this. I've found a video, or I am going to give them a project and it's going to be around this type of technology. And then the students are not impressed in the least. Solan says yes. When the tech acted up, speaker didn't want to play or the projector is acting up, yes. We've all had those experiences. Fia says definitely. And of course, like with everything, Elan says yes. When the tech fails, Beverly says my projector froze when I was doing my final. Oh my final TP in the ped. No. And thank God she had a plan B. Indeed, Beverly. Yes. So technology, we all know sometimes is not as faithful as we would like it. Elaine says her audio refused to work in her PowerPoint for her final TP. Oh, wow. And I'm pretty sure we have lots and lots of stories where sometimes the technology, causes some issues. All right. But we want to take a look at how TPAC can help. So how does the TPAC model provide a framework for growth and change? Because at the end of the session, we want for our lessons to actually be creating transformative lessons for our students. So how does the TPAC model provide a framework for growth and change? And remember, the T stands for technology, P for pedagogy, and C for content, and the K is knowledge. So there are three areas: the content knowledge, pedagogical knowledge, and technological knowledge. Content, as I would have mentioned, and it was reinforced in the video, is your expertise. This is the area that you teach. This is what you want your students to know at the end of the session. Your pedagogy would be how you teach. So am I going to put my students to work in groups? Am I going to use games today? Am I going to teach as a whole class? Is it going to be student-centered or student-led? Or am I going to have a session where I am, leading the class? So that is your pedagogy. But then you have your technology, and your technology would be the tools that would get you to deliver your content effectively through the way that you have decided, which would be your pedagogy. It is really when the three work together that you are going to have success. So you always start with your content. What do I want to teach? One of the biggest issues or one of the biggest mistakes educators tend to do is start with the technology. We see a nice tool and we say we're going to use it, and then we try to fit it into what we want to teach. But it's always important that we remember we always start with what do I want my students to learn? What do I want to achieve at the end of this class? And so the content is what is really the first step. Then you have to consider your pedagogy. What would be the best way to teach this? And in thinking about your content and your pedagogy, you have to think of your context. Your context would be, who are my students? How many students do I have? What is the age of my students? Because certainly we will not have the same strategies for Form 1s as we would have for Form 6. If my class is size 40, it might be difficult for a class that size to do particular activities versus a class that might have 25. We need to think about resources. If we are going to use technology and we know our school has unstable Wi-Fi, why are we going to use technology that is going to be dependent on Wi-Fi? We are going to be setting up ourselves for failure. We also need to make sure that we are comfortable with the technology. And when I say comfortable, it doesn't always mean you need to be an expert at using that technology, but we need to be comfortable with, if we are the ones going to present, make sure we are familiar with it, make sure we do our research, and most importantly, make sure to test it out before we actually go into the classroom. On the other hand, if you're using the technology where your students are the ones going to produce the end product, this generation, they're very tech savvy. And so most times if you give them something like a video to create, you don't need to even tell them what software to use. They will go, they will research it, they'll be able to do their editing and so on. So you have to just be kind of aware of all the different contexts. And the context would determine what your content, pedagogy, and technology use would be. So everybody's context would be different, and that would define what your final outcome would look like. But you always start with your content, which is your what you are going to deliver. Then you go to what is the best way to deliver this, so my how. And then the technology would be what would be the best tool to get to this point. And if you all have any questions, you can feel free to post them. So this is an example of what you want. So you always begin with the end in mind in a classroom when using technology. And beginning with the end in mind means you start with what are my learning outcomes? What do I want to achieve at the end of the class? What do I want my students to achieve at the end of the class? So that would be based on things like your curriculum, cross-curricular, the software, digital resources, etc. And then your pedagogy would be, how do I want to teach? Is it going to be student-centered, teacher-directed, project-based, game-based, etc.? And the technology would then be determined based on, of course, what your resources allow, whether it's going to be an interactive display, whether you're going to have tablets in the classroom, computers or laptops, whether it's going to be online or offline. Are you going to use mobile devices? Is it that only 2 students in my class have mobile devices? Then I can't expect to do, I shouldn't therefore have an activity where my students are going to use devices. So these are some of the considerations before you actually plan a lesson. And at the end of the session, you will receive a resource that will allow you to be able to go over everything that we did today, as well as some checklists so that you can go back in your classroom to say, okay, did I do this? Did I check for this? And so, as well as, of course, some examples of what the lesson is going to look like. So at the end of the session, you're going to have that resource. So let's talk a little bit about now getting into the actual technology. So we just looked at an overview of TPAC, which is really, in terms of when you're doing your lesson planning, the 3 areas that you need to consider. But we really want to look at now, when I am in the classroom, I want to transform my students' learning through the technology. And this is where we get into the meat of things, the SAMR Framework. And this was created by Dr. Ruben Fuentedura, and he really wanted us to determine the manner in which technology is utilized in our classrooms, both from the teacher's perspective as well as from the student's perspective. So what the teacher does as well as what we give the students to do. Is anybody familiar with the SAMR framework before we get into it? Can anybody tell me what that SAMR means by any chance? And who knows, maybe a prize will be given if anybody can find out. But I guess we'll have to do a timer so nobody goes online to search it up. So Aileen is coming in for the prize. Let's see. She has the S. So the S is substitution. She can't remember the A now. Can anybody help her out? The M is modification. Yes, that's correct. Then we'll see if she will get the R soon. All right, so SAMR is a framework which we can use in terms of looking, yes, Afia is correct, it's augmentation. And Aileen says redefinition, so very good. All right, so SAMR. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you can use this SAMR. And of course, if you were to look on the internet, you would see a variety of pictures describing this SAMR model. But this picture is from 21st century educators. And we used music because we felt, you know, Trinidad and Tobago music is part of our culture as well as within the region. So we really wanted an image that we could relate to. So we start off at no tech. No-tech is the area where basically, we're going back to writing on the board, whether it be a whiteboard or a blackboard, teachers in the classroom, and we're teaching writing our notes on the board. We want to then move to substitution. So we now have technology. What can we substitute that with? And of course, if you look at the picture, we now have a record player. So the record player is in the comfort of our homes, and we can play the same record over and over, as opposed to if we went to a concert and we could only hear the song once we're there. Now with the record, we can actually now play it over and over. But really and truly, there is no functional change in terms of what is taking place. And of course, just to give an example, when we were writing on the board, now a lot of teachers have now put their notes on PowerPoint or any kind of presentation media. So we have notes now, but there is no difference in learning for the student when we have, whether we wrote the notes on the board or whether we have the notes on a PowerPoint that's now written. So really and truly, there's no functional change in terms of how the students are learning. When we get to augmentation, so we now have our radio cassette player, and the radio now allows us to have AM, FM radio, as well as, of course, we can now listen to our cassettes. And of course, some of us are old enough to remember the days when we were trying to record off of the radio, and we'd have to stop it just before the radio announcer spoke. And so the radio is still substitution, but now there is functional change. So the radio allows us to do a little more. And in this case, in terms of the classroom, this would be an example. Still sticking with the PowerPoint presentation, we now add video, audio, and we now add visuals, etc. to our PowerPoint. So students can now interact with it a little more. However, it is still just now with a little functional change, but it's still substitution. Where we want to get as teachers is really modification and redefinition. This is where the transformation in the classroom actually takes place. And we want to look at a practical way in which to do so. So modification, we see the iPod. So the iPod, when the iPod came out, it allowed us to download MP3 music. It allowed us to download music in MP3 format, which meant that we could now download a significantly more music than would be held on a cassette player. We were able to now share documents. It is now portable, so we could move around with it. So what does that look like in the classroom? So we're going to take that same PowerPoint presentation, because the thing with the SAMR model, it doesn't matter what the tool is. It is really about how we use the tool. So we now have our presentation. We now have our PowerPoint. In substitution, all we did was type notes. In augmentation, we added some visuals, some videos. But for modification now, this is where your lesson is now redesigned. So you begin to transform how the students are learning in your classroom. So with that same PowerPoint presentation, we now have a feature to share. So we can now have students collaborating, because we can now work on the PowerPoint in class together, but even beyond that, we can now have a joint class with our neighbors. So we have 2 teachers on the compound who are doing a similar project, maybe 2 groups in a year group. And we want to be able to share that PowerPoint so that students can go and comment on each other's work. And yes, before you may have been able to do that, but it would have taken a lot of work to have to then show the students the PowerPoint and then ask for comments, where now all of this can be done simultaneously. And so modification now allows for your lesson to be redesigned. What happens in the classroom when your students are now sharing their work? Anybody can think of any benefits where your students are now having to share their work besides with the teacher? Where students are seeing what they're doing real time, where they can get feedback from their peers in real time. So you don't have to do as much teaching as well. The students will be able to give feedback online once they share their PowerPoint online. And some of the benefits with transforming a lesson using modification in this way would be that students now take greater pride in their work, because now their peers will now be looking at it. It also allows us to do peer feedback. So they're not only getting feedback from the teacher, it allows us to do collaboration. And all of these skills, of course, are 21st century skills. And definitely, Beverly, they're now engaging with each other a lot more. And so modification allows for your lesson to actually be redesigned. And the final stage is redefinition. Redefinition, so the cell phone was invented and you could have all your music on your cell phone, but more than that, you can actually, across the globe, when a song is released, anybody can hear the song at the same time. You can have comments from persons around the world. And certainly the cell phone has changed the music industry because, of course, even radio has gone online. You have so many options. I mean, YouTube, you'd have videos now with the music, and you can certainly have comments. So you would sometimes go onto a YouTube video and you will see comments from how many years ago, and then you put the comment, you add a comment to that person, you reply to that person, the person may reply to you, and of course, you all don't know each other. So how does that work in terms of the classroom? So redefinition is when tech allows for the creation of new tasks, which were previously inconceivable. You could not do it before technology existed. And this would be now, we're sticking to the PowerPoint examples, and that's what most of us use. So you now have your PowerPoint, and you want to be able to do something that you could not have done before in the classroom. So PowerPoint now has a feature where we can actually do screencasting right within PowerPoint. So students can now actually be told, you know what, you have to do an explainer video. You can decide to add music, and you are going to create a screencast of your PowerPoint presentation. You're going to then put that up either as a YouTube video, or you can put that up as a vlog somewhere. You can actually put it up on the school's website, depending on what you have. And then you are going to be putting their work out there where strangers can now comment, where they can actually now have interaction with persons outside of Trinidad and Tobago, persons outside of your classroom. And you could actually join up with another school even, somebody who, especially, you know, those of us who are teaching languages, you can actually go online and say, okay, I've made a connection with somebody in Mexico. I've made a connection with somebody in Guadeloupe. And you can actually have the students now paired with each other or working across the globe. And that is what technology has allowed, because before that, that would not have been possible in our classrooms. And so when we are thinking about our lessons, we want to think about how can we get to modification and redefinition? How can we get to the point where we are using the technology to actually do something that we could not do before? It's great to use it for having your notes and so on, but how can we take this technology to the other level? So just a reminder, so the first two rungs of the SAMR ladder should be considered entry and base level. And I must say that I do believe that most of our teachers are already doing substitution and augmentation. So it's not that we are now starting, but we really want to go to the next step, which would be becoming transformative teachers using technology. And when we use technology in a transformative way, it is both engaging and highly effective. So that students actually, as Afia is saying now, they remember what they have learned, because now they're interacting differently. They're actually seeing it as real life. So it's coming out of the classroom and they're actually able to now do something that they would not have been able to do before. And they tend to get very excited about these things. So just a little plug. Does that mean then that substitution is bad? Do you think substitution is always a bad thing? Does it mean that you should never use technology as a substitution? Right. So a couple of people are saying no, they believe it does have a place. And you are absolutely correct. We don't always need to have a gourmet meal. It's nice to have, yes, our rice and chicken and callaloo and so on. But yes, Aileen, you are correct. It isn't necessarily bad. There is a time and place to have substitution. So I just want to say that. at times it's okay just to use the technology as a substitution to what you would have done before technology came along. What we don't want, however, is that you stay there. And so this is a little bit of, these questions should help you to be able to determine if you are doing it correctly. When you are looking at substitution, you want to think about what will I gain by replacing the task with new technology? And just sticking to our PowerPoint example, when we convert our lesson from the board to notes, the thing is we don't have to write it over again. It's easier to edit. And it's easier now to take from the substitution level actually to the other levels because you already have your notes. The augmentation, we want to ask, does the tech add new features that improve the task? And this is really important because adding a video or a visual or audio to a PowerPoint does not necessarily make the PowerPoint presentation better. Using a game in the classroom, while it might be fun, this we still have to ask, is it accomplishing the task that we set out for? We need to be mindful of things like that. Modification, does the task actually change with the use of tech? And redefinition, does the tech allow for creation of new tasks previously inconceivable? And most times, I just want to mention that sometimes in one lesson, you can have multiple levels of the SAMR model. So at one part of your lesson, you may have done substitution. In another aspect, you may move to modification. So sometimes you can have 2 or 3 levels of the SAMR model. So any questions? Because now we're going to see if you were paying attention. All right, so we're going to actually try it with an assignment. The assignment that is non-tech would be create a trifold brochure reviewing a selected town. It is handwritten content with compiled, cut and pasted magazine clippings. How can we now move to substitution? So remember, the substitution has no functional change. So that's just like the record player that we would have used as our example. So how can we now move from a trifold brochure that has handwritten content and that we go cut and paste magazine clippings? Any ideas of how we can move that now to substitution? Right, so good. So Elan says use Publisher to create a brochure. Nyan says students can use Microsoft Publisher, right? Word, yes. Excellent. So, right, Anika, Word or Publisher, you're correct. Right, so substitution, we can use any presentation software. It could be Word, could be PowerPoint, Prezi, to construct a presentation reviewing a selected town. But remember, for substitution, all you did was exactly that. You substituted the original assignment, but it actually did not have any functional change. So whether the students wrote it out or they typed it out, it would not have had any functional change. So we want to take it up to the next level. The same assignment, an overview of a location consisting of handwritten content. How do we then move that assignment to modification? So the modification, remember, is now our radio, which allows us to have different exposure. So we could have the AM, FM, we could have had the radio cassette. So how would we then change this lesson to augment it? So Elan is coming up with some lovely ideas. So do a photo story with audio, a voiceover, yes? That would definitely be augmentation. Make a video, creating a video with the expected information. Excellent. So you were paying attention. Good job. Excellent. So this is what which we all would have said, augmentation. So incorporate interactive multimedia, audio, video, hyperlinks in the presentation to give more depth and provide more engaging presentation. Wonderful. Now let me see if you can now transform this lesson into the modification phase. So the modification, remember, is the iPod. The iPod is where we would have now been able to carry it around. We would have had more access to music. We would have been able to share it easier. So remember, modification now allows for a redesign of the lesson. The technology allows for a redesign. So let's see if we can figure out what modification would look like. All right. So just to make sure that we get to the end of the presentation, I'm just going to give you an example, and you can see if this is something that you would have come up with. So your original assignment would have been the location, but also, well, Nayan, yes, social media apps to share created information. Excellent. Share on Edmodo. Very good. Have students build an online document, share, posting it online. Good. So creating a digital travel brochure that incorporates multimedia and student created video. So instead of doing the handwritten, they actually now go digital. And of course, once it's digital, it allows them to share, and also it allows them to create their own videos as well. So sharing via Edmodo or YouTube. Excellent. You were definitely paying attention. So let's see if anybody could come up with what the redefinition of this lesson could be. How can we transform this lesson into something before technology would not have been able, that we as teachers, we would not have been able to do? How can we use the technology to now create something that before was inconceivable in this type of classroom? And I think this would be a good point. The first person that types in an answer for redefinition will get a free access to any of our online webinars and any of our webinars coming up soon. So the person who is able to tell us what redefinition would look like will be able to come to any of our, oh, well, Beverly, Beverly actually, yes, Beverly, use Google Maps. Excellent. And Ellen said, send student created video. Students of a school in the country studied and asked for feedback. Really, really good. Excellent answers. And yes. So you can explore the local with Google Earth, seek out and include interviews with people who have visited the locale, use videos. Excellent. So you can actually now create something that would be able to be used. And of course, Beverly, we will send you your free coupon to be used for any webinar that you would like to attend for the rest of this year. So let's just summarize. When you're doing substitution, you want to think about what will be gained from replacing this task with technology. Augmentation. Are there any new features or functionality which the technology offers? Modification. Does technology significantly change the way we teach the task? And redefinition. Does technology allow us to create entirely new teaching and learning opportunities that we couldn't do previously? So just to give you some examples, substitution, that is, tech is a replacement for what you used before. So like reading an ebook. There's no difference between reading a hard copy book, a book in print versus an ebook. Or if you told a student write a story versus typing up the story, or looking at a paper-based map versus a digital map, or drawing with a pen and pencil, but now you're using software and stylus to draw a picture. So remember, substitution is where the tech is a replacement for what you used before and there is no functional change. When you get to augmentation, it's still substitution, but you increase the functionality. So things like a math teacher doing graphs instead of doing it on the board, you can now do it through the technology, you're able to now plug in different data so the students see in real time the ability of the graph to change. Of course, you can use different colors. You can use now media to create a story. Even the way they do research has changed. Most of us would have had to go to the library and use several encyclopedias and different books in order to get our research. Now they just have to learn how to research online. So this is augmentation. And of course, where we want to get to would be round 3 and round 4. So modification, we get to rethink and modify tasks because of the technology. And this would be like creating collaborative tasks. And as teachers, we really need to start exploring how we can collaborate with schools right here within our country. We can have collaboration internationally. Mystery Skype is one of those tools that you can use. You can actually collaborate with a teacher in another country, and you can have their class meet your class online and have a session. It could be in a foreign language classroom setting, geography, etc., cultural exchange online. You can even do a mashup of artwork with online professionals in a collage, and that is for to encourage students to be creative in the arts class, music, etc. And then, of course, redefinition is when you have actually now transported your student out of your classroom, because this is the stuff that, as students, we would have dreamed of. And I mean, so many things can happen. We can now take students on trips with virtual reality and augmented reality. There's so many museums that have now have virtual tours. You can go on a whole tour in using Google Maps. Even crowdsourcing data, you can actually, if students had to do research, they can go onto any social platform and ask questions. So they gather data not just from their classmates, but data from people all around the world, depending on where their circle is. You can create videos, and I know from experience, you tell students, go create a video, and they will come back with something that you have no idea how they created it, but they are willing to learn that. Or using the games, Minecraft, that they can create a world that you can get them to now explain, and they'll be excited to do it because it is something that is interesting and different to what the rest of the class would be. So this is just an example of social studies that I wanted to, so you can see it working together. So we had to use presentation software to write about the different types of families. But if we wanted to take that a step further, we can now ask students to include different types of families, including pictures and videos. Modification and redefinition, of course, would be where we transform the lesson. So we can ask students to create a vlog using Flipgrid. Flipgrid is basically where students can go and create a video, and they can share that video with their peers. So you can ask peers to comment and ask questions, and so you can have a discussion going on continuously with the students, and that can be done outside of the classroom. And redefinition, of course, you can actually have the students create a documentary about different types of families. And of course, you can ask them to actually interview real families, including family abroad. Because with tools like Zoom, Skype, you can allow them to be able to actually do work that is outside of Trinidad and Tobago. You can allow them to do work that is outside of their class, and then put together a documentary which would allow them to build other skills, such as editing, such as even the ability to put together a video with music, with pictures. And so they learn a lot more skills when modification and redefinition take place. And of course, as with 21st century educators, we never leave you empty-handed. This website, which will be part of the resources offered, actually has several lesson plans that are already done in the SAMR model that you can download and that you can take and edit, and you can actually apply it in your classroom. So you're not starting from scratch. You will be able to see what the lessons look like, and you'll be able to use them in your classroom. So, and also you will be provided with a checklist that you can use when planning your lesson to see if you are using technology correctly. So just to summarize, remember, we do not start with the technology. We always start with the content. Then we go to the pedagogy. which is the how we teach, and then we see which technology, which tool is going to help us to achieve our goals, bearing in mind our context. We must bear in mind our context. And then the technology, we then look to see, are we using it in a substitution? Are we using it for augmentation? Or have we actually modified our lesson, redesigned our lesson because of the technology? Or have we actually been able to take it a step further and actually do something that we would not have been able to do prior to technology coming into our classroom? And so that's the end of the presentation. So I'm going to take some questions, comments, feedback at this point. So feel free to send any questions or comments. And of course, even after the session, you can also send any questions or comments to us, and we will get back to you. And in the meantime, I'm going to share our tools. So please download them so you can have them with you. All right, so do you have any questions, comments, feedback? I hope the session was useful, and I hope it has given you a better idea of when you're using technology, where your starting point is. I really want to emphasize that we never start with technology. We always start with what do we want to achieve at the end of the class, what will be the best way to teach our students, because we're looking at our individual students in front of us, and we would also now look at how we use the technology in our classrooms. Right? So Anika says, thank you for the clarity. One member asked, will you have a session teaching how to use Powtoons, blogging, etc.? Yes, certainly. Once we can do that. The aim is to really have the webinars once a month. So if you have particular sessions that you would like, we can organize. We have a team of experts that we work with. So if you have a particular session that you think you would really want some assistance with, you can message us at that email as well. And we will be able to follow up with you. As well as if there are things that you would like us to look at on Facebook, because we do share free resources. If there's a topic that you would like us to look at on Facebook, you can also message us. All right, so Nayan says, definitely appreciate the information and the change in perspective. Excellent. And what I would really appreciate is if when you go back and you do your lesson plans using the tools that you now have, it would really help if you send feedback and tell us if it really made a difference in terms of how you planned, how you're now planning your lesson. Sophia says, information for growth and change. Thank you, plenty. MEd information received. Yeah, so Afia is doing her MEd, and she said this information is going to be useful. All right, so we're going to stay for a little while longer. If there is anybody who has questions, comments, or feedback, as I said, even if after you leave the session, you have a question that pops into your mind, or when you look at the resources that we would have shared, and you have questions, then feel free. You can even send us your lesson plan to take a look at. It's not an issue. We really don't want to be just do a webinar and then we leave you unsupported. So you can feel free to send us any questions or comments that you may have along the way. All right. So Jadel, did I miss any questions along the way while I was chatting? So Ellen, thanks so much for this informative and insightful session. Beverly says, sure, it should be obvious, but starting with the content is a good reminder. Sometimes we feel so pressured to use the tech to do something and it doesn't always fit. Yes, Beverly, that is something that we definitely need to remind teachers of constantly. All right, so if there are no more questions or comments, that would be the end of the session. You will receive your certificates in your emails. So if you do not receive it, please let us know or check your junk mail to ensure that you did get it. You're most welcome, Candice. Thank you very much for participating and for giving us an hour. Thank you very much. All right. So I will send the feedback form in your emails if you can fill them out. I forgot to put it up here, but if you can fill them out so that we can get feedback in terms of how you found the session, it would be really appreciated. All right, so that's it. So everybody got a chance to download the resources. Once everybody has gotten a chance to download the resources, we will close off. So I believe so. All right, so bye everybody. And thank you again very much. See you at our next webinar.